we go along. I think it's a pretty simple message, and it's one I hope you take home with you, because if I see you on the street, I'm going to quiz you on it. So I start with a problem statement, a logical first step in the development of any argument. Human activity is putting immense pressure on the planet. You can think of this branch as the Earth. You can think of these birds as individual pressures or demands or symptoms of those demands. Perhaps the U.S. deficit bird isn't quite salient to the point I'm trying to make, but certainly there are many pressures. And these individual challenges synergistically work together to create global macro challenges that are greater and less predictable than the sum of these parts. One might say that the emergent property of these collective problems is unsustainability. And this pressure is so great that the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, which was a 5-year-long study international study that looked at data from over 1,000 sources from around the world on the state of global environments, concludes that human activity is putting such a strain on the natural functions of the Earth that the ability of the planet's ecosystems to sustain future generations can no longer be taken for granted. Now, as someone who's studied ecological trends for over 10 years, I can assure you this is not an alarmist statement. This is not a extremist environmentalist political statement. This is an attempt at an objective conclusion to an analysis of trends. And while this statement may have not been crafted to be intentionally alarmist, it certainly is alarming. And those of us who know how to read the trends or distress signals as I think of them, those of us who are equipped with that literacy agree that much in our world needs to change if we want to hope for a sustaining future. And perhaps one of the first things that needs to change is how we think about these problems. So this quote by Einstein is one of my favorite because I think it targets the key barrier that there is to solving those problems. And that is human understanding or worldviews or paradigms that we're locked into without even realizing it. So individual and cultural paradigms, they influence how we identify a problem, how we approach it, what knowledge we apply to it, whose knowledge is valued, and ultimately the solutions that flow from that constellation or package of understanding. So I took Einstein's challenge to heart, and I attempted to apply novel thinking to a complex problem that I am professionally and personally committed to. And that is human settlements, or human habitats, as I think of them. Now, what is wrong with conventional North American human settlements? Well, for one, they take up a lot of space, and that comes at the expense of habitat for other organisms. And habitat destruction is the leading cause of species extinction around the world. Secondly, they're automobile dependent, and that's an incredibly energy-intensive and polluting form of mobility. They're supported by very expensive public infrastructure that many communities in North America are actually asking whether they even have the revenue streams to maintain that public infrastructure and eventually replace it over time. The buildings themselves are rarely built to any true environmental performance, and I think there's many of us who might agree that much of our urban fabric is just plain ugly, alienating, and even dangerous. And unfortunately, some of the technological approaches or solutions that are being proposed to some of these individual problems don't actually make our human habitats any better. So as this cartoonist is trying to illustrate is whether you get stuck in traffic in a hybrid in 2025 or you got stuck in traffic in 2005 in a gas guzzler, you're still getting stuck in traffic. So that signals to me that that's a dysfunctional mode of transportation regardless of what energy it runs on. And that's not to say that advances in energy efficiency or more compact communities aren't important. They certainly are, but they're not the panacea. They're not the answer to all environmental problems. And they certainly don't exemplify that new thinking that Einstein was alluding to. Now, my first degree is in the ecological sciences, and after spending many years understanding how ecosystems work and understanding the world as the living thing that it is, I couldn't help but think that nature has a pretty good thing going on. For one, she's able to meet the needs of all her organisms, or children, she might say. She's able to meet all their food and shelter needs in a way that doesn't produce any wastes, or at least no toxic or persistent waste. So the resource of one organism becomes, the waste of one organism becomes the resource of another. And she's able to do so using only locally available and locally appropriate materials. She's not going around the world harvesting and transporting materials to meet local needs. She's able to meet not only the needs of the current species, but she's actually able to invite more to the table over time. Biodiversity generally increases over time in most ecological systems. And she runs on a clean, renewable energy source, being the sun. So she doesn't have to worry about energy challenges like peak oil the way we do. So after understanding and becoming, I guess you could even say, enamored and a bit enchanted by ecological systems, I couldn't help but wonder if there were rules in nature or system attributes or characteristics about nature that may have some application to human context and human problems. And I had to ask, what might nature have to teach us? And this is not really a novel line of inquiry. Biomimicry is a word generally given to looking to nature for solutions, but certainly I didn't see this line of thinking being applied to human settlements. So I believe nature can provide a model, and what I mean by that is capturing in the human environment the complex efficiencies yet simple elegance that you find in the design of natural systems. I believe that nature can provide the measure, and what that means is tying planning goals or performance measures or benchmarks to ecological systems' ability to support them. It recognizes that the Earth is finite and that there's only so much to go around, and that's what we should be basing our targets on. And I believe that nature can serve as a mentor. And what I mean by this is a shift from hubris to humility in how we approach planning and design decisions, recognizing that our knowledge and our approaches and our solutions are incomplete. And at the very least, we should be explicitly aiming to learn and evaluate from our status quo conventional development, rather than simply accepting it as status quo because it's the only model that we have. Ooh, can I go back one? So this was part of, this line of inquiry was part of my master's in planning and research, and this diagram shows a logic, construction of a logic sequence to construct my argument. So I asserted we need new models of urban development. I posit that ecological systems offer a reasonable model. So I had to ask, how do ecological systems function? What are the words that describe them? What are the systemic attributes and characteristics that they're governed by? And what rules are they governed by? And then I had to ask, how might these rules be applied to the language of settlement planning and design? So I'm going to start with the eco rules. Unfortunately, or system attributes, characteristics, those were the kinds of things I was looking for in ecological systems. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go through the individual attributes themselves. I hope some of these words will just kind of imprint on your minds as you look at the slide. But I will walk you through the 4 dimensions that I explored to attempt to understand and analyze and explain ecological systems and how they function. So we begin with structure, which refers to the biotic and abiotic components. So biotic being living, abiotic being non-living, and the organization and their relationship to one another. And second, I looked at functionality. So this refers to productivity and throughputs, energy and material flows that are constantly circulating throughout a system in order to support that structural integrity. These are the kinds of words that describe how ecological systems function. I looked at the dimension of temporality, as ecological systems are incredibly complex and incredibly dynamic. They're constantly changing. They're having to change in the face of constant pressure. And finally, I looked at the dimension of emergent property. So ecological systems and many complex systems actually display emergent properties, which means they display sum totals that are greater than the sum of the parts. So you could think of a function or a service like water purification or air purification. This is a service that isn't fulfilled by any one organism or even team of organisms, but can only occur through the grand total assemblage of all the components working together. That's an example of an emergent property. Oops. So like I said, I attempted to take those types of words, those characteristics, those system attributes, and try to apply them to the language of urban settlement and design. And these are the kinds of indicators or criteria or concepts that I came up with, the ones in the bubbles. And again, I don't have time to go through them all, but I hope you'll look at them. And I should say here too that throughout my work, I defined a system as being sustainable if it could meet 2 main criteria. Firstly, if it could regulate its ecological impact to fit within the confines of the Earth's ability to sustain it, so carrying capacity, if it could operate within its carrying capacity without eroding that. And secondly, I looked at the dimension of resilience. And what I mean by resilience is the ability to adapt to changing circumstances and remain viable over time. And the reason that I wanted to draw apart that distinction here is because I noticed in the literature on sustainable urban development it's beginning to acknowledge the concept that we need to regulate our ecological impact. Certainly those of us who think about this very critically would agree that professional practice is really not quite as far as it needs to be, but those terms are starting to appear in the literature. But the concept of settlements having to change to challenges on the horizon was not really being captured in the literature so much. And so I couldn't help but think of, you could have this phenomenal, incredibly low impact, self-sustaining eco-village, but if it's located on a coast or something like that that's expected to experience sea level rise, well then you couldn't really call it sustainable over the long run unless it could actually adapt to its changing circumstances. So another thing that I looked at in my work is I wanted to know if conventional best practices in sustainable urban development were capturing the kinds of concepts that I came up with here. And one way that I did that is I looked at sustainability assessment frameworks, so something like LEED-ND, so LEED for neighborhood development. And what these are evaluation frameworks that set a gold standard or a target of where industry should be heading if it wants to achieve truly sustainable development. And they offer points and certification to development that meets their definition of sustainable. So I wanted to know, I compared my criteria to their criteria. The ones in red are the ones that are not currently being captured in the sustainability assessment frameworks today. And I looked at more than just LEED-ND, although I didn't look at the Living Building Challenge Communities one, because at the time the communities version wasn't available. The building one was available. If we look at the resilience criteria of sustainability, again, we see that a lot of these concepts are not showing up in the literature. So we're not asking whether our settlements should be designed to store critically important resources in times of resource scarcity, which I would actually say is something that we maybe should be thinking about, considering that oil is getting expensive. There's a lot of the goods we depend on that fuel source, that kind of thing. We're not asking whether our infrastructure should be designed to be flexible, convertible, and expandable over time to change and grow as the community changes. So my work concluded that there was a gap, that there's some room out there in professional practice and best practices to perhaps accommodate some of these ideas. And now whether human systems should be designed to function like ecological systems is up for debate, and it should be debated. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it's worthy of debate, and for no other reason than because of my problem statement earlier. We need new models of urban development, we need creative solutions, and nature may have answers for us. Now I want to conclude with this expansive line of inquiry that I can't help but veer towards every time I engage on this material. And it's about how the humans and the built environment interact with each other, and how that relationship influences how we see the world. So I can't help but ask questions like, what values does our built environment reflect of us? And I keep thinking of, if generations from now archaeologists were uncovering our ruins, what would they conclude about what was important to our lives and how we lived in our communities? And I ask, what values does our built environment promote, and which does it exclude? And can the built environment be designed to reflect the living context in which all humanity operates? I would say that it's not doing this very well. And finally, can the built environment be designed to encourage the valuation of nature in this life context? So instead of designing for artifice, waste, and separation, can we be designing in a way that invites nature in a way that we can come to observe it and understand it, perhaps even by extension care for it? Can we design for human and social needs as well, such as basic needs such as joy and inspiration in our built environments? And I certainly think that if we're going to make any progress on this line of thinking, then we're certainly going to have to take our inspiration from